Good evening. Welcome back to Answers on Eschatology. We're in video number 7 of our study of the prophets in the parables. So once again, we are taking a small break from the actual parables of Jesus, and we're looking at another passage in John chapter 1, which is a discussion between Nathaniel and Jesus, where they both draw from Old Testament passages, specifically in Zephaniah and 1 Kings, Micah chapter 4, and we're going to see how those Old Testament passages, specifically by Jesus, are pulled into the first century historical context and applied to the restoration of the remnant of the first century through Jesus, who is the King of Israel. This is some good stuff, and I think you'll enjoy this. So turn with me to John chapter 1, and I'm going to read verses 43 through 48. It's not quite the whole passage, but this is all we'll have time for. So we'll read these verses, and then, like I said, we're going to flip back to the Old Testament sources. John chapter 1, beginning verse 43. The next day, he, that is Jesus, purposed to go into Galilee, and he found Philip. And Jesus said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, of the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathaniel and said to him, "We have found him, of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael said to him, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." Now look at verse 47. Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Verse 48, Nathanael responds. Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered and said to him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." We'll stop right there. Now, a surface reading of this passage and a surface interpretation of this passage where it goes something like this. Well, Jesus saw Nathanael coming, and because he's God, he knew that Nathanael wasn't a liar. No deceit was found in his mouth, on his lips, etc. And Nathanael says, "Well, Jesus, how do you know me? How do you know I'm not a liar?" Right? And Jesus, again, because he's God, says, well, while you were sitting back in the backyard under your fig tree, I saw you. Okay, well, that's possible. Maybe that's the interpretation, but I don't think so. I don't think that's all of it. Not even close. So we're going to go back to the Old Testament, see where Jesus and Nathaniel are drawing from, and hopefully that will give us a better understanding of this amazing dialogue. Now, jump back to John 1:47. Watch this. Let's start here. Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." That is a direct allusion to Zephaniah 3:13. Go there with me. Zephaniah, the book of Zephaniah, he is a pre-exilic prophet. He prophesied just prior to the destruction of Jerusalem and Judea in 586 BC by the kingdom of Babylon. And Zephaniah's prophecy in chapter 3 is not only the destruction of Jerusalem, but their restoration under the remnant that would come back under Ezra and Nehemiah to Jerusalem and begin the reconstruction, the rebuilding of the city and the nation. But obviously, like many other passages in the Old Testament concerning both judgment and restoration, this foreshadowed the final and ultimate judgment of Judah and Jerusalem in Jesus' generation and the messianic last days restoration that Jesus would accomplish. And that's exactly how Jesus applies this. Now watch this. Let's look at the context of Zephaniah 3:13 just to get this whole picture. Let's begin in verse 8. "Therefore wait for me, declares the Lord, for the day when I rise up as a witness. Indeed, my decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out on them," that's Judah and Jerusalem, "my indignation, all my burning anger, for all the earth will be devoured by the fire of my zeal." Listen, verse 9, "For then," now here's the restoration, "for then I will give to the peoples purified lips, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord, to serve him shoulder to shoulder from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my worshipers and my dispersed ones." See, this is the calling back now. "Will bring my offerings. In that day you will feel no shame because of all your deeds by which you have rebelled against me. For then I will remove from your midst your proud exulting ones." Right? The judgment of the wicked. This is the restoration of the remnant. and you will never again be haughty on my holy mountain. You're going to have a change of heart. Now watch this, verse 12. But I will leave among you a humble and lowly people, and they will take refuge in the name of the Lord. The remnant, here it is, the remnant of Israel will do no wrong and tell no lies, nor will the deceitful tongue be found in their mouths. That's exactly where Jesus quoted from in John 1:47. For they will feed and lie down with no one to make them tremble. Jesus, by alluding to this passage in John 1:47 and saying this of Nathaniel, Jesus was identifying Nathaniel as a last days remnant of Israel that was being restored in their ultimate and true messianic restoration. This is absolutely amazing. Judgment was coming, yes. And by the way, that's the context of John chapter 1. John the Baptist had just preached his message. Andrew had heard John, told Philip. Philip had told Nathaniel, and they had come to see Jesus. So this whole message of judgment's in the background, and Jesus pulls that context, not only of judgment, but of the restoration of the remnants, into his conversation with Nathaniel. Nathaniel is a member of Israel, the remnant of Israel that would be restored and saved out of the judgment that was about to come. But notice this, Nathaniel responds to Jesus. Let me turn back to John chapter 1:48 and says this. Nathaniel said to him, "How do you know me?" Nathaniel, again, is not saying, Jesus, how do you know I'm not a liar? How do you know, I don't speak any deceit? He's saying, how do you know who I am? And as we'll see next video, Nathaniel understands that Jesus is identifying him as a remnant of Israel. And Nathaniel's saying, how do you know me? How do you know that is who I am? How do you know that's my heart? How do you know I'm one of the chosen remnant of Israel searching for the kingdom? And watch this. I'll explain everything I just said in a second. And Jesus said to him, before Philip called you, here's how I know. Here's how Jesus knew Nathaniel. Before Philip called you, you were under the fig tree. When you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Again, Jesus is not saying, listen, when you were sitting under a literal fig tree, eating figs or whatever, I saw you. No. Again, Jesus is alluding to a couple Old Testament passages where this idea of sitting under a fig tree is Hebrew idiom for a place and an attitude of restoration and kingdom prosperity and blessing. He was saying that, Nathaniel, I know your heart. I saw you sitting in a place of expectation of the kingdom, dwelling on these things as a remnant of Israel. I saw your heart, and I know you are one of the called ones. Now watch this. Go with me to 1 Kings chapter 4:25. I have to hurry here. 1 Kings 4:25. This is where this language is taken from. I saw you sitting under the fig tree. In the context of 1 Kings 4, this is the establishment of Solomon's kingdom. He has just subjugated his enemies underneath his feet, so to speak. He rules and reigns over the house of Israel. Listen, let's pick this up in 1 Kings 4:20 through 21. Judah and Israel were as numerous as sand that is on the seashore in abundance, and they were eating and drinking and rejoicing, a fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant, typologically, of course. Verse 21, now Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms, from the river to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt, and they brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. He is king of kings. Watch this. Verse 24 and 25. So Judah and Israel lived in safety, every man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. What does that mean? Under the vine and under the fig tree, to sit in that place is to sit in a place of kingdom, prosperity, and blessing. This is where Nathaniel was in his heart and in his mind in anticipation of the messianic last days restoration of Israel and the king of Israel to come and save them. Let's look at another one, Micah 4:4. This imagery, again, in this language is used in Micah 4:4. Watch this. And it will come about, Micah 4:1 through 4. And it will come about in the last days. Well, Jesus was living in the last days, wasn't he? Yes, he was. That the mountain of the Lord's house will be established as the chief of the mountains and will be raised above the hills, and the peoples will stream unto it. Many nations will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths, that we may walk, for the Zion will go forth the law. I've got to slow down. And the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. That this began to be fulfilled in Jesus' generation through his preaching and especially on the day of Pentecost. The new covenant began to flow from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and render decisions for mighty distant nations. They will hammer their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they train for war. This is the restoration of Israel to the kingdom in Zion. Listen, verse 4, each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one will make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. To sit under the vine and sit under the fig tree is to be restored in the kingdom. Nathaniel says to Jesus, how do you know me? How do you know I'm this remnant of Israel? Because I see your heart, Nathaniel. I saw you sitting under the fig tree. I saw you expecting the coming of the king of Israel, as we'll see in our next video, to restore the last days remnant into the kingdom and bring you to a place of blessing and prosperity as the remnant of my people. That is powerful stuff. That is exactly the message that Jesus is communicating to Nathaniel. And as we'll see in our next video, I'm totally out of time. Nathaniel understands that message completely. And he understands to be Jesus as Yahweh, who was accomplishing this restoration as the king of the remnant of Israel. And we'll see it next time on Answers on Eschatology. Bye for now. Have a great week.